Welcome to a special edition of Life and Liberty. I'm your host, Dave Householder. Very blessed to be invited last week to appear on America First Radio, which is nationwide, and they've got a great audience. It's run by a guy named Paul Hanosh and David Leffler. We talked about everything having to do with liberty, so it's really kind of a good primer on the whole idea of a non-coercive voluntary society where the only time we use force is to stop people from using force. This was the vision of the Founding Fathers, and it's part of our DNA. We've, of course, lost that, and we need to get back to it because not only is it a good thing to follow the example of the people who put this country together, it works. It works. And it works because that's the way that we were designed. We were designed by our Creator to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So without further ado, here's the radio show.
I wanted to introduce our next guest, David Householder, who is the author of The Blackberry Bush, which is a novel, and online Life and Liberty magazine at davidhouseholder.com. He's also pastor of Robinwood Church in Orange County, California. Thank you very much for joining us today, David.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you guys, and thanks for doing this. This is gives me a lot of encouragement about our country because I'm really not betting on the NSA right now. They're doing a lot of crazy stuff, but it's guys like you that are getting out there and exercising your freedom and making it work that are going to make a difference. I don't think they have a chance against guys like you. So the more of it, the better.
Hey, well, thank you for those kind words, David. Yeah, we appreciate you too and being a voice of reason. David is what I would call a philosopher. He's surfing the waves of truth out there and sharing what he's gleaned from his life and his experiences. And I really appreciate what you've been doing for our country as well.
Yeah, it's a blessing to do that. We're very blessed to be here. And I put my flag out yesterday, and I kept it out an extra day. I just felt like it. It's a great country we live in. We've been very fortunate to be given this nation. And also our Founding Fathers gave us just incredible DNA. I look at what they gave us, and I don't think ever in the history of the world has been gathered a group of human beings like that who could do what they did and put together what they did. It's remarkable. It's almost magical what they put together. And you guys talk about stewardship and maintaining what we've had, and I think it's so important to take good care of those things which have been passed down to us, including our freedoms, including our way of life and our society.
Yes, absolutely. And we have, I think, the tools to turn our nation around if we can educate enough people to see that truth. And one of the things that I've recently been learning, Dave, is about the issue of coercion versus voluntary exchange. And I've been reading a book by a man named Frederick Bastiat, and it's called Economic Sophisms. Mm-hmm. I haven't quite completed it, but wow, this thing is just chock full of insight and wisdom. And he's kind of coming from a worldly perspective and I believe, a Christian perspective. And as he looks at economy, the physical economy and political economy. And are you familiar with some of his writings?
Yeah, Bastiat is wonderful. He's a Frenchman, and he writes pretty early on. It was quite a while ago, but he got this stuff before a lot of people did. And he started to understand and looked around, and you mentioned the word philosopher. That's exactly what he is. And by philosopher, I don't mean somebody who sits around and just meditates all day. These are people who make, and this is how I define a philosopher, someone who makes an unusually stubborn attempt to think clearly. Someone who just says, no, I'm just not going to accept the way everyone's thinking. I'm going to really think through. If this is true, then this is true. If this is true, then this is true. And if A is equal to B, and B is not equal to C, A cannot be equal to C. And you have to make those hard thinking decisions. And he's one of those guys that did that. He really did. The non-coercive society is key. That's key to everything. We were born with freedom. We were given freedom in our minds. And the truth is you can't coerce someone else's mind without any kind of torture or without coercion. And you can't even change their minds then, really. You'll just force them to do something. And we're born free. We really are. And we're, as Jefferson said, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. This is how we're wired up. And so to be anything other than free is just the wrong way to do human society. And so these are people who start to get this. And I think that they got it back in Bible days, too, because I think the Ten Commandments are nothing more than a blueprint for a free society. Just don't coerce each other. Don't take each other's stuff. Respect each other. Don't lie in court. It's pretty simple.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the point that he makes. You know, we kind of have this mentality when it comes to making money that, hey, the quicker, the easier, the better. And that's not what the Bible teaches. You know, it teaches that from the days of the garden, that we have to earn our bread through our sweat, and we can't expect to hit the lottery, and that's kind of what the mindset is, I believe, of a lot of people today, is that we can just get the government to bail us out or to give us a handout or take care of us or protect our industries. And I have to admit, politically, when I first became involved in politics, I was kind of all over the place. I liked Ronald Reagan. I served in the military under Ronald Reagan, and but when I went to college, I was exposed to a lot of leftist thinking. I had a communist English professor, and the Lyndon LaRouche people were out there recruiting, and I was listening. I was looking for answers. I didn't come from a very political background as a child, and so I was looking for answers. And eventually, though, I joined the college Republicans and started finding answers there. And my friend was a Buchananite, and he was more of a protectionist at the time, although Buchanan, when he started out, he was more of a free trade kind of guy. And so I looked, in our political internecine Byzantine squabbles in the college Republicans and Young Americans for Freedom groups, that the libertarians were kind of weak-minded, unpatriotic, selfish country clubbers who didn't care much about the working class. And that's kind of where I was coming from. And Buchanan made some very strong arguments for the protectionist examples, and we looked at libertarians as free traitors, as a traitor.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so they wanted no borders and didn't care about the great sucking sound of manufacturing jobs going to Mexico and elsewhere, and into pot legalization and stuff. And there were some, there's some legitimate questions that I had, and but I've been learning since I've been exposed to Ron Paul and some of his libertarian thought. And not all libertarians share the same beliefs. It's a huge tent.
Oh, we're free thinkers, for goodness sake. Yeah, and so there's a lot of leeway there, and there should be. There's not a doctrinaire sort of card-punching thing. We actually have to argue this stuff out, as did the Founding Fathers, as did the founders of Israel back in the day. They had to kind of work this out. And it's not easy. It doesn't stay done, which is why they want free speech and a free press, so we can keep working it out, because the world keeps changing, and we need to keep kind of hashing these things away and refitting them and making them work for each generation and relearning them. Like you say, it's an education thing. It's not so much, it is politics, but not really. It's helping people understand what's really going on. And once you help people understand what's really going on, it's an education process, the liberty process, then they're going to get it, because liberty, it's just an idea way too big to fail. And eventually it's going to make sense to people. But it's not easy. It's not easy thinking. It's easier to say, I'm going to vote so that somebody gives me something, or worse, I'm going to vote so the government will take away from someone else and give it to me.
Yeah, that's the easy route, and we have to guard against that, and we have to educate. And that's what Bastiat was trying to do with his essays on economic sophisms. He was trying to expose the fallacies, and I can see the point when he makes these cases, that when we get government involved, putting up protectionist blocks, obstacles in the way of free exchange, that we tend to limit supply and make people poor that way, and creating an artificial demand. And what that does is wind up, creating less wealth and creating less.
Well, it really does.
Incentive.
The free market has done more to create equality in economy, and has done more to bring people out of poverty than any other system, bar none. They're not even close. I mean, look at China, which supposedly is communist, but isn't and hasn't been since Deng Xiaoping, and has gone capitalist basically since him, when he said, "Hey, if it catches mice, let's buy that mousetrap." And so he basically went the market direction and took a hard market turn. And since then, China has pulled more people out of poverty than any other society ever in a generation. And The Economist just this last week, which is one of my very favorite magazines, I like to read through it because I disagree with so much that's in there, but even they were saying what's really changed the world right now, and we could look at by 2030 or 2040 the end of poverty in the world, the end of what we call crushing poverty. And by crushing poverty, it's those pictures you saw growing up of kids with flies all over their faces and terrible distended bellies and all that. And it looks like it's going to be over within about a half a generation. And it's been a remarkable drop in poverty in the world, in crushing poverty. And it's been almost entirely where markets have become freer. And they were saying in The Economist that if India were to be able to have less regulation and Africa had less corruption, then we'd see an end to poverty in our lifetime.
Wow. Yeah, and
that's the market.
See that.
It's the market that does that. That hasn't been government that's done that.
Right. Yeah, and government has impeded that and hindered that progress of just the natural law that God has created. If we follow that, we would be so blessed if we were to, follow the Ten Commandments and our interactions, and trying to explain to Americans that taxation, redistribution of wealth is basically theft by another name, and they don't seem to understand that too well, because I think it was Romney that said, I think 47% of Americans are paying zero taxes, and so are they getting rebates? So they're net takers rather than producers. And so as they see that the government benefiting them, they don't have a problem with the strong arm of the government being used to shake down the producers so that they can continue to take.
Yeah, and I feel bad for them, too, because they're not really living full human lives. Because the whole idea of full human life is to get out there and to add value and to be rewarded for that. And if you can't add enough value to support yourself, which some people can't because they have physical handicaps, or they're too young, they're kids, or they're too old and can't produce economically anymore, or whatever, the way we're supposed to solve that is a family. You're supposed to – I look at the Latino families in our area and the Asian families, and they're so good at that. They've got these multi-generation families, and they all support each other and help each other. And not everyone in that family has the ability to support himself or herself fully economically. So the best workers go out there and do that, and the other ones have other roles. And grandma in the Latino community watches the kids while everyone else goes out and works. And people love their grandmas. And those grandmas rule with an iron rod. And it's a beautiful system. And that's the way it's supposed to work. And we're supposed to help the poor. We're supposed to redistribute wealth, but it's supposed to be voluntary.
Exactly.
And relational. And we're supposed to meet the people that we're helping, because that really helps our souls, too, because we realize that they're not that different than we are. And we don't even see people like this. We just get taxed and the money goes through some welfare thing.
Right. Yeah, and that's, what welfare tends to do is reward, unwed mothers and to divide families, and it creates more havoc in people's lives than it alleviates. And so, that's something that we did well for a long time before there was an income tax. The communities took care of their own, and I hate to say this, but I kind of look at my daughter as my 401k. I hope that we'll raise her well so that she will take care of us and want to take care of us. I don't want to wind up in some old folks' home and with strangers. I want to be an extended family, and I think that's a healthy system, and we need to kind of get back to that, and get the government out of the charity business, and encourage donations to private organizations. And if we weren't taxed so highly, we could afford to give to the charities of our choice, and see them doing.
They're 10 times more efficient too, because they're motivated and this is their passion. Whereas government, their motivation is control and regulation. So they're not going to. It doesn't work as well.
Yes, exactly. Getting back to this point of educating our fellow Americans, Bastiat uses the term plunder, that people are being plundered like the Vikings, basically stick them up, hand it over. And, we can figure out a better way to spend your money. And he goes back to history and talks about the Athenians. He says, Athenians, you force slaves to serve you. Has it never occurred to you that you are practicing upon your brothers the most iniquitous kind of plunderer? Or imagine a tribune speaking at the following in the forum: Romans, you have based your whole way of life on the success of pillaging of all other nations. And, people don't understand that, we're practicing a form of plunder through our taxation system, plundering the producers, the productive people in our society, and discouraging them from producing more.
And we're pillaging all over the world, and we're not getting any money out of it. It's just costing us. So we're doing stupid pillaging.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the whole Iraq war, one of the points was, we'll have access to oil, and we'll be able to, rebuild their country, and, our oil companies will take in some of the profits from that. And that wound up being a big money soaker. We're rebuilding all the bombed out cities, and rebuilding their infrastructure, and they got Chinese oil companies to come in there and take care of their business for them.
Yeah, and meanwhile everybody hates us even more than they did before. And so our men and women in the military have done a great job. They've done what they've been told. They've done it better than anyone else, and we're very proud of them. And I would never, ever come down on our troops. Our troops are the best in the world, and I salute them and totally back the troops. I don't necessarily back the politicians that send them places, though. I really don't. I look at Afghanistan, I'm thinking, what on earth are we doing there? What's the purpose? I've talked to high military leaders who've come back from there. I've asked them one simple question: what is the goal over there? And nobody has an answer. Make things a little better. When does that kick in? This is why the founding fathers says you don't go to war unless you declare it, and you don't declare it without the Congress getting in there and putting their names on the line and signing an ink and saying we're at war now. And the word declaration has the word clarity in it. It's in the word. And the last time we did that with Japan, he says we're going after unconditional surrender, nothing else. And so there it was, the Missouri, 3.5 years later in Tokyo Harbor, and they were signing unconditional surrender. There was no question as to what we were doing. And we haven't fought a war like that since. I'm not even sure if we win these wars. It's hard to tell.
Right, yeah, very foggy. We're definitely not winning it in the financial purse strings. I mean, what is our benefit? Maybe a few defense industries are raking in some record high profits, but that is not a productive part of the economy. And we're living in a fantasy world because the dollar is based on the oil, the petrodollar, and so the world has to purchase dollars in order to purchase oil and other commodities. It's the world reserve currency, and so as long as it stays that way, we can get away with these unwise, imprudent actions and investments and wars, and we don't seem to face a repercussion. But eventually, natural law will catch up with our country, and that we'll eventually learn from pain that it causes if the dollar collapses. And many economists believe that our current levels of spending are unsustainable, and if we continue in that vein for much longer, the world will start to create an alternative world currency, because we haven't been responsible with that status. And once that happens, there'll be enormous pain that will be wreaked upon our nation that I really fear for our country.
Well, I'm a real realist. I see a lot of serious problems, and people think I'm pessimistic, but I'm not. I'm optimistic, because I do think that what's going to happen is, I don't think it's going to be, the dollar's not going to be replaced by the yuan, or it's not going to be replaced by the euro, it's not going to be replaced by the pound sterling, not going to be replaced by the yen, because those are government currencies too, and those are also sick systems in their government manipulation and everything else. I think it's going to be replaced by private currency, because I think there's no question in my mind that people are going to come up with a way to exchange value in such a way they'll just leave the government out of it. They will. It'll be a very sophisticated form of barter, and some kid, some Bill Gates type, some Steve Jobs is going to come up with a way to do that, and it's going to change everything, and it won't be taxable. And the government as we know it will go out of business, and what that means, it'll go back to the way it's supposed to be. The government's there to provide courts for us to settle our disputes, to secure our borders, to make sure we don't coerce each other. That's the only place they're supposed to use coercion, is to keep us from coercing each other, to keep us from using force on each other. And that's what government's supposed to do, so we can live in peace and so we can have a thriving economy. And I think the government's going to go out of business. I really do, because somebody's going to figure out how to exchange value without them. And what are they going to do then?
You know, that's one of the things that Bastiat mentions in his book, that government, the state, is subject to the Malthusian law. It tends to expand in proportion to its means of existence and to live beyond its means. And these are, in the last analysis, nothing but the substance of the people. They're feeding off of the people like a parasite. Woe, and he cautions, woe to the people that cannot limit the sphere of action of the state. Freedom, private enterprise, wealth, happiness, independence, personal dignity, all vanish. And so I thought that was an incredible warning to Americans today, that, hey, if we don't get a hold of the reins of government, which is what we're called to do, we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people, that, eventually it's going to implode on itself. And, that's what many economists are predicting. And, we're seeing, the gold kind of going through the roof, although it's kind of come back down to earth a little bit lately, but it could go back up again considerably. And we also see Bitcoin, which is kind of an alternative people's currency, you might say, that has also been wildly popular. So, we need to educate our fellow Americans and get them to see things from a more rational point of view before it's too late. We hope we can avert this kind of economic disaster, but eventually, one way or another, we will come to our senses. It's just the law, God's law, natural law.
Well, it will happen. You're right. And whether you believe in God or not, and I do, natural law works. Whether or not you believe God made gravity, that works. And so does natural law. And natural law is provable throughout history, that it continues to reassert itself. And the basis of natural law is basically that you can't coerce another person. And the only time you can use force is to stop another person from coercing. And so these wars that we fight, that we're not really threatened going to Syria. These are not wars. These are not wars just to protect ourselves, and that's legitimate, to protect yourself. But these are wars of aggression. We're choosing a side, and we're coercing a decision in Syria, which is absurd. It's absolutely absurd that we think we know enough to go over there and coerce and use force, a no-fly zone, or we're going to arm rebels who are just thugs, by the way. And last time we did that, they turned on us. Saddam Hussein, we made him a billionaire. Osama bin Laden, same thing. We gave him Stinger missiles and everything else because he wanted to kill Russians. Turns out they turn them on us. And these are thugs. There's no good side to choose in Syria. There really isn't. Except for maybe the Christian might. What are we doing over there?
Yeah, that's a good point. Rand Paul actually made a point to that the other day. He was saying that our excessive American engagement overseas has, really hurt the Christian community there. He also noted that Jesus was, a man of peace, and that this is the Christian message that we should be sending. The disciples were believed in non-resistance, and blessed are the peacemakers, for they are called the children of God. I thought that was really appropriate for Rand Paul to pointed out. He said, I believe individuals and countries can and should defend themselves, but I simply can't imagine Jesus at the head of an army of soldiers, and I think Christians need to be wary of the doctrine of preemptive war. We must and should stand with our fellow Christians in the Middle East and around the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean war, and it certainly doesn't mean arming sides in every conflict. And,
no, really exactly, especially we don't understand. There's no such thing as a Syrian, for goodness sake. We invented Syria after World War I, and the French took over, and they botched it, and the British took over Iraq, which they invented. There was no such thing as an Iraqi. We invent these countries, and we carve them up, and we ignore tribal boundaries and everything else, and then we go over there and try to fix it. And all the things we do over there, we just compound the problems. Would we want a foreign army to come in at Gettysburg and try to decide which side wins? That was our fight. We had to figure this out ourselves. We wouldn't have wanted the French army or the Spanish army or the Russian army coming in and at Gettysburg and tipping the scales. That would make no sense. This is Syria's fight. It's horrible, but they've got to work this out themselves. They've got to figure out how they're going to live together. And if we coerce them, that doesn't make them want to do it.
Right. Yeah, well, a lot of these phony countries have fallen apart, like the former Soviet Union, Yugoslavia. They were held together by force of arms, and once that force became weak, the people took advantage and, created new means of existence and new countries. And so,
exactly.
That I think is what should happen in Syria and Iraq. They need to be able to divide along, their religious, ethnic lines, and so that they can live peacefully with their neighbors.
Yeah, the right of free association. You associate with the people you want to associate with. And a free society and a free world, you can do that. And you interact with the people you want to interact with. And as long as you don't coerce other people, you can do that. And that's natural law. That's the basic of every legal system. And we seem to think that, well, if you're a government, you don't have to follow that rule, but you do. You see, that was the genius of the founding fathers and of the Ten Commandments and of everything else. The government has to follow those rules too. They do. They can't coerce and they can't do things to us. And when they steal our information without asking us, like the NSA, that's coercion. That's theft. And they do that with taxes. I get letters every few days saying, you got to pay this, you got to pay that. And it's a form of bullying. And I have never evaded taxes, never want to evade taxes because it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. But man, it's just it's turned into a coercive society, and now they want a monopoly on force by taking everyone's guns away, which is crazy. The whole idea of the founding fathers was that we wouldn't have a standing army. We would just have militias in the states, run by the states, by the way. The Constitution says that, not by the federal government. The federal government would just set the standards so we could all fight together if we needed to. We'd have the same ammunition. But the whole idea was that we would be called together to defend this country if we needed to. And most 80 to 90% of the battles in the Revolution weren't fought by our army. They were fought by regular local militia who kicked the British out, and they won almost all of their engagements. And it was our regular army that struggled.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it was Tim Murphy with the best rifle in the world, which he made in his own barn, who took out Simon Fraser at 300 yards, the British general in upstate New York, and turned the tide of the war.
Yeah, those Kentucky long rifles were incredibly accurate, and the British didn't have anything like it in their arsenal. Our sharpshooters were tearing apart the British officer ranks.
And a non-aggressive militia works really well. You look at Switzerland. I've got a friend there, Beta Hoffmann, who is a professor at the University of Bern. He's a professor in geology. And I've been to his house, and he's got a machine gun in his house. And everyone his age has one. And they get together for a few weeks a year, and they do some training and do their thing. And they have not been invaded for 450 years. And they have not one Swiss soldier has set foot off of Swiss soil with a weapon. Mm. They don't believe in that.
Yeah.
They say it's against natural law. And even the Germans were scared to death to invade. At the height of their power, were scared to death to invade Switzerland because every single man had a machine gun. And there would just be hundreds of thousands of dead Germans.
And they probably didn't want to risk their Swiss bank accounts either.
No,
but
but that was the vision of the founders too. That we would be a well-armed militia, and those who wanted to would come together as volunteers and protect the country if we needed to.
Yeah, that's important, and voluntary gatherings of people to protect their communities and to be kind of a deterrent to government coercion and to keep the government at bay. That's important to maintain our Second Amendment rights and make sure that the government, here in California, which is where Dave and I both live, it's getting a little scary. It seems like they're going to push as hard as they can to limit our Second Amendment rights, and we don't seem to have much recourse except for a few good state assemblymen like Tim Donnelly and others that are fighting tirelessly to protect those.
Yeah, Tim is a hero. He really is. He's a courageous. The cool thing is too, he's really good at talking to people on the other side. He'll just show up in the office of his worst opponents, and he'll just say, "Hey, let's go have lunch. Let's go talk about this." Yeah, that's amazing. He's got a big enough mind to do that.
Tim is a good man, and I can see him going far, and I'm supporting him as much as I can. Now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about yourself and some of the things that are going on in your life. You mentioned a novel, and I saw that on your website. I thought it was someone else's book, but the Blackberry Bush.
Yeah,
Can you
the
tell
Blackberry
us a little
Bush.
bit about?
Absolutely. The Blackberry Bush is a coming-of-age novel it's a book about freedom, and it's a book about a young man and a young woman who are both born on the day that the Berlin Wall falls. One's born in Europe and one's born in the United States. And it's sort of a treasure hunt through the landscape of your own soul as you read it. It's one of those fast-moving, surprising, switching scenes all the time, kind of very complex book that makes you think. It demands a lot out of people. But it's a story of people coming to faith, and not just coming to faith because someone told them something and they agreed with it, but really working out what it means to live in a world where there's a present God, and a God who is actually engaged in our lives, and how we can interact with God. And so it's a book for people. It's a book for grandparents because it's a book that is really values the importance of grandparents, and I think grandparents are very, very important. It's a book about parents who are concerned about their young adult kids. It's a book for young adults who want to explore growing up and explore faith and explore philosophy and explore what they're doing here. And these two young people grow up in the book and struggle with a lot of things. And it's a book for groups because there's a study guide at the back. So church groups or student groups or class groups or English teachers. It's perfect for like an AP English class.
Now, would you say that it's a public school teacher would be? That would definitely be within the bounds.
Oh, totally. This is something I want to talk about for just a second. This is really very important. If you guys hear nothing else, and all the listeners, you guys hear nothing else, hear this. The Founding Fathers had a problem with diversity. We didn't have any denomination or any religious group that had a majority, and so they had a huge problem. These were all tiny minorities, and nobody agreed on anything, spiritually speaking. And so their solution was, like in a 12-step group, to have generic Judeo-Christian spirituality, a higher power. And so for most of our history, we would say, hey, we're a diverse country, so our solution in the public square will be that we will talk about the Almighty, we'll talk about providence, we'll talk about the Creator. He was talked about very generically, never sectarian, never like a Baptist or a Lutheran or a Presbyterian or Catholic. It was just very generic, and that's on our money, it's on everything, and that was the solution. And even if you're an atheist, you just say, well, that's just my reason is my higher power, whatever. So it even worked for them. But then in the early 60s, we shifted over to thinking, well, hey, we're in a diverse society, so rather than have generic spirituality, let's have secularism. And secularism doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's incompatible with all the other worldviews. And so our kids get yanked around with that, and it really honestly doesn't work. When you ask the question, does it work in a public school? Well, it's a generically spiritual book, and it should work because that really is the only way to have software compatibility with all of our groups in this society. And it just really, you and I grew up in that confusion, and it's messy. It's really, really messy. And the Founding Fathers got it right. They really did. Abraham Lincoln would call the country he was barely a Christian, and he called the country to national days of repentance. Gather in your house of worship, on your customary house of worship, on whether it's a synagogue or a church or whatever, on Thursday at noon. and pray for forgiveness for the sins we committed on the way to victory in the Civil War. You know,
as was Thomas Jefferson, who
totally.
was kind of a deist, and he yet has spoke very glowingly and supportively about the Bible and morality and Christian teaching.
Oh yeah, Jefferson was more so than anybody. Jefferson and Franklin, the two theologically weirdest guys of the founding fathers, were the two ones who insisted most on prayer. And Franklin kept trying to get prayer meetings going during the Constitutional Convention the whole time. He kept at it. He says he prayed an hour a day.
Yes.
He opened up his windows, and he sat there naked in front of his open windows and prayed with his air bath, and he prayed for an hour a day. And Jefferson, he says, if we don't ground our rights in the Creator, then we'll be grounding them in people. If we ground them in people, people will take them away.
Wow, that's a great quote. I never heard that from Thomas Jefferson.
That's why he insisted on putting that wording in the Declaration. He says we cannot have a republic without that.
We have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to turn it over to my co-host, David Leffler. Dave, do you have any questions for Mr.
Yeah, I want to make a quick statement real quick that one of the things I've been telling people, because they've been talking about this fear issue and whatnot, is the government is the one who I think is very afraid, because if they weren't, they wouldn't be coming after our rights so hard. They're afraid of what we do have. And if they can take that from us and we allow them to do that, they don't have anything to fear from us anymore. And so I think so long as we hold on to that and remember that the Constitution is there to keep the government in check, not to allow us to have rights. No, it's to keep them in check. And I think that's the important thing that we have to remember there.
That's so true.
As people.
So true, David.
As people. Let me ask you a question going back to the economy real quick here, because I'm just a guy on the street where you guys are the big heads here, do the heavy thinking. But what can an individual do to protect themselves from all of the economic turmoil that's going on? What is just a couple of things that the average Joe can do to kind of make sure that he can, his family gets through some of these things?
Well, you mentioned a great word there, and that word is family. I would do everything you can right now, and that's what I've been doing the last few years. When I saw the economy going bad, I just worked like crazy on relationships and started to build those relationships, knowing that you can't get through this stuff together, or you can't get through this stuff on your own. You gotta have people who've got your back, who are in your corner, who are going to be there no matter what, and who are going to stick it out with you, because I don't think we can count on the government right now. I don't think we can count on them for Social Security. I don't think we can count on them for anything. So build relationships and strengthen your faith. I understand church going isn't all that sexy, and it's a lot more fun to go do all the things you could do in California, but regular church going and building up of your spirituality is really key too. So family and faith are so important, and staying productive. It's staying productive and not being afraid of losing your job. Thinking in terms of what does the economy need from me right now? What do I have that the economy needs, and how can I provide that? Because I think we get so security-oriented that we forget that the Lord put us here to add value, and He gave each of us skills in doing that. I have never met a person yet who doesn't have a rather remarkable skill of some kind or another. And we need to use those skills. And you can tell what those skills are because you're interested in it. You're always thinking about it. You're thinking, what about this? What about that? You're reading magazines on it. You're looking up websites. That's what you're interested in. So do something with that. So I'd say family, build up your spirituality so you got some spiritual backbone. When the resistance fighters were doing their thing in Holland, they would really only take from really committed Christian people, because hating the Germans wasn't good enough. You had to have some spiritual and ideological backbone. So spirituality and be productive and build your families. That's the key in my mind.
You were talking earlier about barter and whatnot, and my brother, he lives up in Nevada, and he was telling me that the people that they all have some property, all these people that live around each other and stuff, and they barter everything. I mean, everything. He bartered a trailer to get some hay, and then he traded some of the hay to get something else. I mean, he bartered everything.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason we do that is because the property tax is the most insidious of all. Because if you tax people's property, then the truth is they don't own it. Because if they stop paying taxes, you take it. and then it's not yours anymore. So then your house isn't yours, your car isn't yours, nothing's yours. If that's the case, we don't live in a free society, because a free society, you've got property. And I think property tax is the first one we have to get rid of, even before income tax. Property tax is insidious. And
well, thank you. That's one of the things that we're working on, is a flat tax or a more fair tax. But, hey, Dave, I just want to thank you for coming on the air with us tonight, and God bless you, and you have a fantastic weekend.
Yeah, I apologize for taking up all your time, but I just got too excited. It's davidhouseholder.com.
This is great.
Check out my magazine.
We will. Thank you very much. God bless.
Blessings on you guys.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. You're here because you want to live in a free and spiritually grounded society where we sense the spiritual nature of the Creator, where we live together in peace, and where we leave each other alone, and where you have all the freedom in the world, but that freedom ends at your neighbor's nose. Until next time, this is David Householder for Life and Liberty.